suspect. In the last paragraph of his original letter, he restates that the investigation is needed to, quote, understand the evolutionary origins of COVID-19 and more effectively respond to both the outbreak and, check out this part, quote, any resulting misinformation. Now, I wonder what misinformation he's talking about, because all of this kicked off after an article mentioned gain-of-function research involving Baric, Xi, and Daszak with Fauci funding. The letter goes on, requesting a meeting of experts to start investigating. Now, we all know how the government goes. That meeting, happened 3 months later? No. Actually, all of these experts got together later that afternoon. I mean, it's almost like they had everybody ready and coordinated maybe during, that conference call February 1st. That panic. The meeting was run by the head of the National Academies of Science, Andrew Pope, the president's science advisor, Kelvin Droegemeier, and guess who else? Anthony Fauci. Now, I hate to keep pointing this out, but just 2 days ago, Fauci was at the center of panic mode, sending out documents and articles that showed a clear money trail from gain-of-function researchers in the U.S. and China directly to Fauci's NIH. Now he's headlining a government emergency meeting just a couple of days later, not merely suggesting, but mandating an investigation to, quote, understand the evolutionary origins of COVID-19. So let's call this for what it is. This is what's called controlling the narrative, a narrative deemed too dangerous for people like Fauci and those at the top of the food chain that were on the verge of being outed. Now just think about what we were facing back in February 2020. All of this was going down. We're facing lockdowns, mandates, no idea how many people would die. The Democrats were making this issue their main campaign battle cry. They had to frame everything as a problem of Trump's making. There couldn't be any blame shifted anywhere else. It could not be China's fault. And sure the heck could not been enabled by a career bureaucrat and reckless scientist. Believe science. Don't question science. It had to be Trump's fault. And 2 of the 3 men directing this propaganda campaign, and make no mistake, as you will see, that's exactly what it is. They were supposed to be part of Trump's administration. Look at all of these facts. Is there any other way to describe it other than Fauci and the president's science advisor colluding behind the president's back, withholding information from him? Fauci has already been brought in front of Congress, and Rand Paul caught him in a bold-faced lie. Fauci will testify again, but it's probably time to bring in the former president's science advisor as well. Just a couple questions, like, did you withhold information from the president? Did you ever lie to him? That's what will get it started. But it's too clear that the right people haven't sat in the hot seat yet. Okay, back to our timeline. 1 day later after this meeting, it's February 4th, and the National Academies of Science responds to the president's science advisor's letter. Even though he was at the conference, he gets this letter. Now remember, this is less than 24 hours since he has said, hey, we should have a meeting with all of the experts and we should really focus in on what the cause is. Less than 24 hours, this comes in. In a nutshell, it says their little collection of experts has deemed COVID as consistent with natural evolution. Really? No kidding. They were mandated to come to that conclusion. They held a meeting to come to that conclusion, and most likely coerced by Fauci, who just days prior seemed absolutely panicked. The letter was produced by the National Academies of Science director, Andrew Pope, and in this email chain, it shows that the conference attendees colluded with him to get all of the wording correct. Now take a look who attended this conference. Who was involved in this narrative? First, Christian Andersen. Now, wait a minute. Just a few days, less than a week, has gone by where he said on January 31st that COVID-19 was manipulated in a lab. Then Ralph Baric, the actual father of the first Frankenstein coronavirus, who had been working with Dr. Shi at Wuhan. The guy whose signature is on the vaccine transfer agreement owned by Moderna and the U.S. government. The guy who would later do the research on the only government-sponsored COVID treatment, remdesivir. Oh, and there was somebody else there, Peter Daszak. Do I even have to explain that one? Nearly all of the attendees had a dog in this fight. Some, Baric and Daszak, had direct ties to the Wuhan lab and years of published data on gain-of-function research. There were no dissenting voices. This was a major shot across the bow to anyone looking into the lab leak theory. Any scientist that was looking for funding would have to stay in the narrative. The world's largest public grant distributor was Fauci. The world's largest private distributor of cash was Farrar, and they were leading the charge. Okay. So after that meeting, and after that letter, the assault on expert opinion papers and science journals commenced. Not a week later. No. February 19th, Peter Daszak, he actually wrote this letter, published in The Lancet. He said, quote, "We stand together to strongly condemn conspiracy theories suggesting that COVID-19 does not have a natural origin." Now, in this version, there was zero mention of his insane conflict of interest here. And I say this version because The Lancet was later forced to amend this to recognize the competing interests. But by this time, this little correction came out. The damage had already been done. The narrative took center stage and never left it. A few weeks later, in March, Christian Andersen also came out, did a complete 180, and published this paper in Nature magazine, one of the largest and most respected science journals in the world. The guy who privately told Fauci that the consensus upon all of the scientists that he was talking to was that COVID was manipulated in a lab. He goes to that meeting, and now he's saying it's natural. Well, it's convenient, but not nearly as convenient as about what was to happen next. A few months later, in August, both Andersen and Daszak were rewarded by Fauci's NIH with millions of federal funding. So the guy who was the only dissenting voice, he changes his opinion and he gets millions. What a good little soldier. They get all the spoils. And this was the message to anyone else out there who might get a little froggy, look into the possibility of a lab leak, or anyone that followed the money trail back to Fauci and the government. You know, they now say that scientists are divided over where COVID came from. And now you know why. Do you remember when I said Dr. Baric corrected his 2015 Frankenstein coronavirus research a year later, adding in funding from the U.S. government to Peter Daszak and EcoHealth Alliance directly to Dr. Shi in China? I told you at the beginning of the show, he left something else out that he didn't upload. And he caught the mistake and he corrected it. What he left out was he didn't upload the virus. So when he wrote that thing, when was that, Jason? Can we open up all the chalkboards, please? He amended this in May of 2020 and issued a correction. Now, wait a minute. That's something that he did in November of 2015. So he corrects his first mistake of leaving out who funded it, He corrects that in April the next year. And then we have to wait all the way until May 20th to when he finally uploads the virus. Is it the same one that he worked on in 2015? Was it similar to Dr. Xi's in Wuhan? Why did he go outside the protocol to begin with? I think I know a few senators that should ask these and probably would love to ask these questions. We asked Dr. Baric to clarify if the virus sequence he left off in 2015 was the same he uploaded in 2020, 5 years later. We also asked him if it was standard procedure to include all this data in scientific publications. You know the answer already. We haven't received a response. Okay, there's one other thing, and I find this incredible that we've missed this. Do you remember when I told you about December 12th when they signed that deal with Moderna? Okay, the government said we want to first make sure that no lawsuits can be had. Then we want to partner with Moderna to be able to make the vaccines. Now, they said that Moderna, they had this opportunity here, November 2015. That's when that contract was proposed. Okay, so that's fine. But then it wasn't until December 12th, 4 years later, that they actually signed the deal. Now, I've been through many high-level negotiations, but I've never seen anything that started 4 years before. Coincidentally, once they find the Frankenstein virus, and then they negotiate for 4 years, and what a coincidence, they sign it just before the breakout of COVID. That's weird, isn't it? Let me just go over this quickly, just so you can really understand it, the important parts. The people you need to know: Dr. Ralph Baric. I'm not assigning ill intent to anybody at this point. These people actually believe that they should check all animals for all viruses, and they should find a vaccine for all of them, so we'll always be prepared. Okay, I think that's insane, very dangerous, but then again, I've been to the movie theater before. So they actually believe this stuff. Dr. Xi, the Bat Lady, she and Baric and Peter Daszak all are in this through the entire thing. That is America and China through a corporation that is being funded by who other than Dr. Fauci's NIH. They did gain of function research. They paid for it. Fauci's people paid for it through EcoHealth. 2015, gain of function. There's lie number one. Then this strange, hey, let's partner with Moderna. I don't think this is normal. I'd like to know, did we cut a deal to where we own it, but we're not getting any money for it now that it's being sold? I mean, I kind of feel like if this would have been done with Trump, you'd kind of go, well, at least we're making money, huh? No. First of all, we shouldn't be making money on something that is this dire, right? We should be openly giving it to people. But it was paid for, all of this research, paid for by you. All of the research to create a Frankenstein monster, and then all the money to develop this. It was paid for by you. If we are getting paid, where's the money? Where's it going? My feeling is It's going to fund more of this. I said at the beginning of the show, COVID-19, biggest story in the history of the world. It has affected every aspect of our life. Public-private partnerships, coronavirus, Frankenstein monsters, a partnership with China. All of this stuff you can look at. When you start to go into here, it starts to get dirty, but you can at least say they were trying to do the right thing. Once you get into this, there's something was going on. Something was going on. And the fact that Moderna started the negotiations with the United States coincidentally the year we found the virus, and then they sign it coincidentally at the same time, I don't buy that. I just don't buy that. But the really disturbing part is the third chalkboard. I should remove Jesus and his mom because I don't think they belong there. The really disturbing part is how you've been lied to and how you have not been able to even ask any questions. Remember, we couldn't even mention the theory of this until about, 4 months ago? Why? I can tell you, they may think it is because it's the best thing for humanity. But I don't know about you. I'd like to be involved in that conversation. I didn't vote for representatives and then just let them do whatever they want and keep secrets from me. I'm very bothered by the fact that we are a co-owner of that. Now, it could be simple of explanation, but this is unusual. We don't do things like that. We shouldn't do things like that. But this is the direction we're going. Public-private partnerships. This is the biggest thing that's happened all over the world. The people at the top, their first response was to protect themselves. The deep state wasn't responsive to the elected president. This stuff has all been happening. How many people even in Congress know this? Fauci's legacy took center stage over your health, your mom and dad's health, and now our children's health. Let that sink in for a minute. The federal vaccine mandate is still being pursued by the government, even though the U.S. Court of Appeals has paused it, said stop. If that goes through, how many jobs will be lost? If that goes through and we have even fewer workers that are going and showing up for work, how many more products will not arrive on the shelves? The mandate itself is a racket. The government co-owns the patent, then turns around and tells everybody you don't have a choice, you have to take it. This government doesn't see us as objects. I'd like to say they see us as customers, but that's not even right. 24/7, you hear vaccine, vaccine, vaccine. What's going to be said about these facts, which you can get yourself, please get them. You say anything outside of the narrative and you'll be shut down on places like YouTube. Are we still on YouTube? Still on YouTube. Can't believe it. How long will it last? By the way, I did a promotion for today's show on Instagram. I think I could fit more people in my office than viewed that, at least when I was live. That's impossible. That's impossible. The algorithms are all stacked against. I know this research is right. And I know that what's been happening in our country doesn't feel right. And this does. It makes sense. Let me show you some CDC. These are Fauci's emails, Barrick's emails, Barrick's correction, these CDC emails. These CDC emails were recently released through a FOIA request. Apparently, they were getting a little worried about the definition of vaccine in the era of mRNA technology that they co-own. Sorry, I can't stop saying that. Quote, right-wing COVID-19 pandemic deniers are using your vaccine definition to argue that mRNA vaccines are not vaccines. I hate to ask this from the control room, but do we have the Bill Gates audio that just came out last week? The video where he was giving a talk? Okay, I want to show you what happened here. They are saying now that people are denying science and saying this vaccine is not really even a vaccine. God forbid you say it's not an effective vaccine. But something came out from Bill Gates. Bill Gates last week said this.
The economic damage, the deaths, it's been completely horrific. And I would expect that will lead the R&D budgets to be focused on things we didn't have today.
Listen to this.
We didn't have vaccines that block transmission. We got vaccines that help you with your health, but they only slightly reduce the transmissions. We need a new way of doing the vaccine.
So we got a new vaccine that helps you with your health and barely blocks transmission. Okay, hang on. Then that's not a vaccine. That's a therapeutic. This is yet, it seems, another failure from Moderna. Remember, they failed on everything before. And now they need the government arm to shut people up so it's not a failure. In fact, they've gone so far now as defining a vaccine differently. This is how the CDC used to define it. The act of introducing a vaccine into the body to produce immunity to a specific disease. Okay, you notice it says that it produces immunity. It's introduced into your system and your body produces the immunity. Well, here's the problem. Apparently, just us crazy right-wingers, we know that people who get the vaccine are not immune. They can still get sick, and a therapeutic, not a vaccine, a therapeutic will make it so it's not so bad, but you still can carry the disease and you can spread the disease. So going off their own definition, their co-owned vaccine isn't really a vaccine. And if it is a vaccine, it's a crappy vaccine. Well, they couldn't have it that way, could they? I mean, we got to have customers. We're on a two-track system. We want to make sure that everybody knows you answer to me, the government, and Fauci, and you will do what we say. They need to make sure that everybody sees that public-private partnership is making that company very, very wealthy, even though it's a kind of an iffy thing. So the CDC, Facebook has just pulled the show. The CDC Ministry of Truth actually changed the definition to this: the act of introducing a vaccine into the body to produce protection from a specific disease. Not immunity, protection. That's a therapeutic. Phew. Now that they've changed the definition, crisis averted. Go get your shot. I'm so disheartened I mean, expected. I'm so disheartened that Facebook, what is it here? What is it about the actual documents that they're afraid of? And why is Facebook so concerned with this? I mean, I'm just questioning, where did it come from? Do you think that's important as we look for a more effective vaccine, a more effective therapeutic? Wouldn't it be good if we knew the origin? It's always been important before. Shouldn't we, as human beings on the planet, not just Americans, but on the planet, have a voice when we're talking about creating viruses in a lab so we can find the vaccine? Some people will think that's responsible. A lot of other people will think that's madness. That's madness. Why take that risk? Shouldn't we, as fellow human beings, have a voice at the table? Or is it only the elites that can say that? This is the fundamental principle of America. You don't control me. You work for me. Now, I hire you to make decisions because I can't be up on everything, but this is a pretty big one. Not only did you hide it in a hurricane bill, you hid the protection and the partnership that was coming for pharmaceutical companies. You're protecting them, so I don't have the right to sue them. Okay, maybe it's good for the collective because that's what we have to do. I guess. Never done it before, but I guess. But then you're protecting them and you're not letting me question things. You're not telling me, and I can't talk about things that are side effects. When I watch TV and I see, two people in a bathtub. First of all, who has two bathtubs? Why, if you want to have sex, maybe you should get into one. That's a different story. When I see that, and it's a 60-second commercial, at least 20 seconds, demand from the government a must do in all of those commercials. They have to tell you about every possible side effect. But have you noticed? We can't even talk about it. It's like there's no side effects. This is the perfect vaccine. Come on. By the way, they're asking for even more of your money to keep doing everything I've been showing you tonight. The NIH wants a 20% budget increase. The NIH is Dr. Fauci. He is the highest paid person in our government. I'd never even heard of him before. And now, after all of this, and all of this is true, he's asking us for another $9 billion? I've got a couple of questions. How much of that will continue going towards risky research? Funding, maybe research in countries like China, who are clearly our adversary. How much of it will be used to cover your own mistakes and lie to the American people? Does anybody actually represent you? Is there not a single person in the mainstream corporate media that has the intellectual curiosity to follow any of this and just ask some legitimate questions? Is there anybody? Is there anybody in the media that isn't in full lockstep with you being shut out on every decision and you must follow the plan? Is there anyone in the media that thinks that's going to work out well for them if they decide ever to question somebody who's in government? Once you've given the government that power, that's usually when in Russia, members of the press who are curious suddenly get very, very sad and throw themselves off of roofs. Lockdown, mandates, things we have never seen in America. Lost loved ones, and loved ones that were lost because of governors saying you've got to take COVID patients. You've got to put them into the nursing homes. No one is really held responsible for that. We have an open border, and yet we're forcing American citizens to have this vaccine, but we're not requiring that from people who are coming into our country illegally, and we're giving them free bus tickets or free airplane and free housing in another city. And they're doing that in the cover of night. We have supply chain issues. Do you think anyone seriously, you know who's in charge of this? His job title is Secretary of Transportation. This is all a transportation. He took 2 months off. Let me ask you something. If your wife gave birth, not an adoption, actually pushed that thing out and then was really suffering from it, and you had a job that was to try to solve the biggest transportation issue that we have had possibly ever in America, and time was of the essence, even with the postpartum blues and everything else that his husband didn't have because he didn't push anything out of anything. Don't you think even your wife you would go to and say, honey, I'm going to hire help. I will be here as much as I can. I will even work from home. But this is about the country. And we have to solve this now. And I'm the guy responsible for it. He didn't do that. He didn't do that. Why? Who's running this show? They're all covering their own backsides. And that was the thing that we found at the very beginning of this pandemic. In a strange way, I want to thank Dr. Fauci for showing the country what they really think about us. They're people that only care about themselves. And people like us are a statistic. We're cattle, and they're the ranchers. We're going into Thanksgiving. And I would ask you this holiday season, when you get together with your loved ones and the people that maybe you don't love so much because they've been such a pain in the neck, that you enter with malice toward none and charity toward all. And you sit down and you just listen to them